Welcome to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod, everybody. I am Brian Morgenstern in the studio with the great Sam Lyman. Remember to subscribe, follow us on Twitter at MorgensternNJ, at Sam Lyman33. We are talking about how central bankers are not big fans of Bitcoin, which should come as a shock to precisely no one. We will give you an update on where things stand with the election, and I'm going to talk about the Yankees and Dodgers in the World Series, the most storied franchises facing off. But let's get started with Bitcoin World. Sam, let's kick it off.
Yeah, a lot going on in Bitcoin World just in the last few days. And as you teased at the very beginning, it looks like central bankers might actually be bullish on Bitcoin. So in being bullish, they also have to be bearish on it publicly. What happened was a couple of weeks ago, the European Central Bank published a paper that envisions what's called a Bitcoin positive scenario. Translation, that's a scenario where Bitcoin goes to the moon. Obviously, Brian, you and I believe that Bitcoin's going to the moon, which is why we work in this industry. What perhaps is most surprising is that central bankers are coming around to the idea now that Bitcoin could continue to soar to astronomical heights over the next several years. They're freaking out about it, absolutely terrified at this prospect because it endangers their whole business model, everything that a central bank does. So if you would pull up this tweet, Dylan. So recently, this is the paper entitled The Distributional Consequences of Bitcoin. Here in this article, they say that Bitcoin is actually bad, that it's bad if it goes higher because, quote, early adopters would increase their real wealth and consumption at the expense of latecomers. In other words, people who adopted a technology early on before it was consensus will benefit more than those who adopt it much later on in life. That shouldn't come as anything controversial. I mean, look at any new technology, the internet, people who invested in early telecoms companies, people who invested in Google from the get-go. Obviously, they're doing really well compared to people who are perhaps buying Google stock just now. So that shouldn't be anything controversial. Somehow they're framing it as something that is controversial, though. So it's this big mess within the central banking world where they are now admitting, okay, Bitcoin might be here to stay. Brian, let's unpack this, though. What do you make of this paper? What does it say about where we are in Bitcoin's evolution? And at the end of the day, do you think this is bullish or bearish for Bitcoin?
Oh, very bullish. There's so many layers. So let me start where to begin. As you were pointing out, I mean, almost the same thing could be said of, for example, NVIDIA stock. NVIDIA has now become one of the most valuable companies in the world. And for people who were in early, they're getting outsized returns because they saw where things were going. They read the tea leaves better than others. It's called investing. Fear of some people doing well in the market and becoming wealthy is it's rooted in this like communist attitude of wanting equal outcomes instead of equal opportunity. So number one, shows that the bankers want to be able to run, and I think we'll get into this, want governments to be able to run permanent deficits. And they think that there's no problem with permanent deficits. Meanwhile, those of us who actually see an issue, a societal stability issue with an uneven distribution of wealth, believe that you need to have growth all around, economic growth, and you need to have controlled government spending, tighter government spending, constrained purposes for government, and that if you just have unlimited money printing and deficits, that means that people who own assets, homes, gold, Bitcoin, stocks, any hard assets, those things increase in value when governments engage in profligate spending. Those people benefit in an outsized way. While the currency is debased, then you keep everybody who's more of a paycheck to paycheck person losing wealth. Their purchasing power is going down. So the haves have more, the have-nots have less, and you actually have a societal stability issue. That's been a root cause of pretty much every revolution that has upended societies since the dawn of time. These central bankers' attitudes is exactly wrong for creating a wealthier and more stable society. But let's take one layer deeper. It really is kind of about preserving their power, because if central bankers are able to put their finger in the wind and play with interest rates up and down and basically just always have central banks acquiring assets, printing more money, um, then that keeps them as kind of the drivers of the economy, as opposed to productivity, which they say is their main concern. They want to see productivity as the driver of value, but they seem to not want anybody to capture that value, but except themselves. So this is really sort of a power play, central planner to the max philosophy. And it shows, what's the saying? First they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. They've graduated from laughing at Bitcoiners to fighting Bitcoiners. And that is very bullish because the next step is we win. And winning, I think, looks like a more stable money supply. Before we had these kind of floating currencies were tied to things like precious metals, silver or gold. I've heard a proposed future of a basket of commodities, maybe Bitcoin's in the basket, maybe beef, maybe oil, maybe gold, other things that have more stable and rising values. Tie that to your currency so that it's not being debased. Have it reflect the value of commodities, and you'll have less inflation and a more stable currency. That is, I think, what winning looks like. You have more Bitcoin adoption. It has a finite supply. You see the value at some point will somewhat stabilize. Maybe it reaches parity with gold, some other similar asset, something like that. You have a future with a sounder money, a more stable money, and a more stable society because people's purchasing power is not being eroded by this reckless government spending and putting their finger in the wind with interest rates to try to control the economy. Can be good. Flexibility can be good at times. Sometimes you need deficit spending in crises, all these things. But this idea of permanent debt and deficits is actually degrading to wealth and stability. So anyway, those are the layers that I see with this. I don't know if you see any other, what am I missing? Are there other angles to go at this from?
I think that sums it up. What I found most interesting about what you just said was that ultimately, economic disparity is bad for societal cohesion. It divides rich and the poor. It leads to wealth disparities that perpetuate themselves over time. And the irony of this paper is they say that if Bitcoin continues to grow, that can't be because it will cause the division of society. Quite the opposite. I think when you return to a harder form of currency or something that resembles less and less the profligate spending we've seen in years past, then we're going to see a more stable society, less economic disparity, a smaller gap between rich and poor. It'll be altogether better for society. It's interesting as well because you brought up this idea, the 4 stages of first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. They are unambiguously fighting Bitcoin at this point. In this paper, they actually advocate for policies to either, quote, prevent Bitcoin's rise or see it banned altogether. So the European Central Bank is not mincing words here. They want Bitcoin to be done away with completely, and they want to use the arm of government to destroy it, essentially. But I don't think they're going to win. You also brought up, Brian, this idea of permanent deficits. So in tandem with the European Central Bank, the Minneapolis Fed also published a paper. Can you pull that up, Dylan? The Minneapolis Fed published a paper that proposes this idea that we can actually, as a country, run permanent deficits on 2 conditions. Condition number 1, the American people don't notice. Condition number 2, we get rid of Bitcoin. So now you have central bankers at the Fed who, along with European central bankers, are advocating to legislate against Bitcoin to get rid of it in some way. My question is, do you think that this is too little too late for the central bankers? Do you think that Bitcoin is too entrenched at this point where it's here to stay, and even if they tried, they couldn't ban it?
I do, because it has now been adopted by so many tens of millions of people. And now with the ETF approvals, more institutions, sovereign wealth funds, more pension funds, more people planning for retirement are including Bitcoin as part of their portfolio. It's going to be very harmful to those constituents if you rip away that value from them. So I do think that it's too little too late. But with any policy proposal or thought exercise like this, my first question, or one of my first questions, is always cui bono, who benefits? from this kind of a statement. And well, who's saying it? A central banker. People who want to preserve their power and their relevance. There are a lot of good people who work at central banks and people who want economic stability. They want less inflation. They want more jobs. They also want to protect their own fiefdom, their own relevance, their own power. And I think that's the root of this freak out is fear that Bitcoin reflects sort of older values of tying a currency to something hard, tying it to something that has more stable value, rather than relying on these guys who go in a room once a month and put their finger in the air or flip a coin and look at some numbers and then make a decision. Should the rate go up by a quarter point? Should it go down by a quarter point? They have this sort of godlike aura around them, and making money more sound pierces that veil. It must be scary for them, is kind of my assessment. And this seems like giving voice to that fear, but it is not necessarily in the best interests of the people. So look, when it's trite and overused, but when Uber threatened the taxi medallion industry, obviously there was kicking and screaming because people had paid $500,000 for their taxi medallion. They were in this closed, regulated system, and Uber just blew the doors off it and made it sort of universal where anybody could be a driver, anybody could be a rider. You didn't need a blessing from the government in order to get a ride home. Similarly, I think Bitcoin's starting to blow the doors off of this idea, this modern monetary theory paradigm that money is super flexible and that governments can do whatever they want because they're governments. Well, you need the consent of the governed. And that is, I think, what this is all about. It's kind of the people versus the system. The people are winning. It is taking a while and it's very slow, but it's happening and it's going to be really good for society in the end.
I hope you're right. I also agree that it's probably too little too late for the central bankers, that Bitcoin is so intertwined with everything we do. I think there is an edge case, though, where the government could make a play at banning Bitcoin or trying to seize Bitcoin. The precedent for that being what's called Executive Order 6102. So not many people know about this, but during FDR's administration, he actually issued an executive order to seize the property of American citizens, specifically seize their gold. And my worry is that people who aren't self-custodying their Bitcoin are at risk of having their Bitcoin in some way seized by, for example, the asset managers that hold Bitcoin for people's ETFs. So I think there is an edge case where, maybe the government could still make a last-ditch effort at seizing their Bitcoin. Hopefully not. I think there's 90% chance that this is just too little too late. I hope so. But we also know that so much of Bitcoin's future will depend on this upcoming election. In this upcoming election, we have Kamala Harris, who has been a member of an administration who's been openly hostile to Bitcoin, has more or less tried to drive Bitcoin innovation offshore by exacting a 30% excise tax against Bitcoin, whose administration has gone after wallet providers, whose administration has tried to taint the entire industry as if it were money laundering by other means. And so that's the administration represented by Kamala Harris. By contrast, though, we have Donald J. Trump, who is the most pro-Bitcoin presidential candidate we've ever seen. He wants to make the United States, quote, the crypto capital of the planet. He is extremely pro-Bitcoin. And Brian, I know a lot of the work you've been doing through the Bitcoin Voter Project and now the Bitcoin Voter PAC has been helping voters understand who are the pro-Bitcoin candidates in this race. I know a lot of work has been done in both Pennsylvania and Texas, and we have ads for that we can watch as well. But I wanted, before we watch those ads, tell us more about what the Bitcoin Voter PAC is doing these days.
Yeah, so two entities that were involved in Bitcoin Voter Project is educational, where we help catch people up on why Bitcoin is valuable, why it's sort of the digital version of a precious metal, is cross-border, instantaneous transactions. People can custody their own assets. They don't have to rely on banks and governments. And with all the censorship that we've seen in recent years, people having accounts closed, debanking, people having transactions censored, I think this type of technology is needed now more than ever. And then the Bitcoin Voter PAC is actually identifying those candidates who recognize this value and would advance policies that will help this ecosystem thrive and grow, particularly in America, because it really is kind of a national security issue. If America doesn't lead on this, somebody else will. China and Russia are a couple that come to mind. It could be our adversaries really leading the economy of the future. And if you're a proud American patriot, you want it to be led by America. So we've been identifying those candidates, a couple of them in this election. You mentioned President Trump. He has become very pro-Bitcoin, which is great to see these issues discussed at the presidential level. In the Senate races, of course, there's a hot race for control of the United States Senate. Two of those races that are very highly contested. One is in Texas with Ted Cruz. He won his last race by 2.6%, I believe. Texas, generally a red state, but not necessarily ruby red. It doesn't have to be. Lyndon Johnson, of course, was a Democrat, longtime elected official in Texas. They had Governor Ann Richards right before George W. Bush. There are competitive races in Texas. And of course, anything can happen in the U.S. We even saw an Alabama Senate seat flip in recent years temporarily. In any case, that race is very important. Ted Cruz holds Bitcoin. He has showed me his River account where he is accumulating Bitcoin. He is now mining Bitcoin. He owns Bitcoin miners. So he's running for re-election in Texas, and we ran an ad supporting him. And then in Pennsylvania, Dave McCormick has come out very pro-Bitcoin, pro-innovation. He visited a Bitcoin mining facility, and he wants the U.S. to lead on these issues. His opponent, Bob Casey, co-sponsored legislation with Elizabeth Warren that was anti-Bitcoin. In the Texas race, Ted Cruz's opponent, Colin Allred, had co-signed a letter from Elizabeth Warren trashing Bitcoin. So here are a couple of races where I have pretty clear contrasts. So we've decided, and they're important seats, so we decided to weigh in with some ads, and we're making sure those get in front of Bitcoin voters who may well vote on this issue. So I don't know which one you have teed up, Dylan, but you can run some of our ads where we're playing in the Senate races.
America's financial freedom is under attack, but Texas has a champion in their corner.
I want Texas to be the oasis on planet Earth for Bitcoin and crypto.
Ted Cruz understands that embracing Bitcoin means giving the people more control over their financial future, not the big banks or the government. Ted Cruz will fight to make sure your money is your choice, secure, decentralized, and free from the government. Vote Senator Ted Cruz, leading the charge for Texans' financial freedom.
Only thing missing from that ad was showing the guy in the voiceover booth wearing a 10-gallon hat. That is a very Texan ad. And Cruz really has been a champion for Bitcoin. And he even retweeted our ad to his millions of followers, which is great. Happy to support him. Now, Pennsylvania is potentially the linchpin for this election at the presidential level, potentially a Senate seat that could determine the majority. And as I said, that's where Dave McCormick has been very out front on this, having appeared at rallies with Trump, having visited a Bitcoin mining facility. He sees the value in it. His opponent, not so much. So that's why we're running an ad in Pennsylvania as well. And Dylan, we can tee that up.
In a world where innovation drives progress, Donald Trump stands at the forefront of America's technological revolution.
We will ensure that the future of crypto and the future of Bitcoin will be made in America. We're going to keep it right here.
Under Donald Trump's leadership, we'll harness the power of Bitcoin, creating thousands of jobs, fostering innovation, and putting America at the cutting edge of financial technology.
And instead of attacking industries of the future, we will embrace them, including making America the world capital for crypto and Bitcoin.
Vote Trump for American jobs, American innovation, and a digital future where America leads.
So that's not the McCormick ad, obviously. That's our Trump ad. Pennsylvania, possibly the deciding state in the presidential election. Trump, of course, showed up at the Bitcoin conference this year, the world's biggest Bitcoin conference. It took place in Nashville, and he started his speech with "Hello, Bitcoiners," and then launched into a fantastic speech where he talked about the importance of self-custody, of the energy boom that this country needs to lead in the digital economy, and many other very important issues like a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the U.S. government to strengthen the government's balance sheet, as opposed to what we already talked about, the profligate spending and permanent deficits. So really important issues. We are highlighting these for that slice of voters who care about this. And it's a growing and really important slice of the electorate. our research, Sam, shows that these voters are not necessarily very partisan. They cut across ideological lines. They cut across parties. They cut across demographics. They tend to be younger. They're not necessarily wed to one, right wing or left wing. Most of them are pretty centrist. And many of them tend to be low or mid propensity voters. And we want to make sure that they have a reason to get out and vote in this election. So that's why we're running those ads. And I think we are making a pretty big impact with relative to others, low spend, but we're reaching them where they are. And that is online. That is in their pockets, on their iPhones. Coinbase is reaching voters in their Coinbase accounts, educating them on where policymakers stand. Of course, they're, broader, they're more crypto. We're talking about specifically Bitcoin. Bitcoin voters are incredibly passionate about this. It's about the values behind Bitcoin. It's the transparency. It's the defeating censorship. It's the sound money that we talked about and how that's good for society. So really important issues, and we're very happy to be involved in this election. I think we're going to have a pretty big impact at the end of the day. After November 5th, we will find out, obviously, but we're doing the work now, and we'll see what happens in just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, a lot is going on right now. And what's so interesting about the Bitcoin voter, Brian, as you mentioned, is that most of them are fairly independent. They're not particularly partisan, but they have no one representing them in Washington. And so what candidates like Dave McCormick or Ted Cruz or Donald Trump are recognizing is that here is a market and it's a group of people who have an unmet need. Why don't I be the person in Washington to represent their need? They're political entrepreneurs, all three of these candidates. Very wise, very smart. And, you mentioned previously, if we could just explain this a little bit more, Senator Ron Johnson, he had a similar playbook with vapors in Wisconsin, which I think inspired some of the logic behind going after Bitcoin voters specifically. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. We may have talked about it on this podcast in the past, but it's certainly worth repeating. So Wisconsin's, purple state. They have a Democratic governor. They have a Republican senator. In this election, could be down to the wire once again. Trump won it in 2016. It flipped the other way in 2020. It could flip back in 2024. Point being, if it's a race that's going to be decided by 1%, you got to scrape every last vote that you can together in order to put together a winning coalition. When Senator Johnson was running for re-election, there was an issue that was prevalent about vaping, where there was some pretty heavy-handed regulatory moves against vaping, but there was a very mobilized block of voters. I'm going to throw a number out there. This may not be precise, but maybe 10,000 voters, which in a state that might be decided by 10,000 votes could flip the election one way or another. And Johnson came out and said, I will protect your right to vape, to use like e-cigarettes and vape. And those people turned out for him. And after he won re-election, he went and spoke to that group and, paraphrase, basically said, I think I'm here because of you. So, whatever you need, I guess I'm your senator now. So that's just kind of one little example of what we see happening with Bitcoiners. If you're a candidate who comes out and says, I will protect your right to self-custody, your right to mine Bitcoin in America, I want this ecosystem to thrive here, you're going to have some voters who maybe they're not as tuned in on abortion, or maybe they're not as tuned in on tax rates or foreign policy, but they do care about Bitcoin because they own it, they have it in their pocket, they are using it to save for their future. They may vote on this. And so it can make the difference. The last couple of elections, it's tens of thousands of voters across like 4 states. So 7 swing states are named, of course, by the pundits these days, any of which could be decided by 10,000, 11,000, 20,000 votes. This can be the difference maker because you're going to take people off the sidelines. Maybe they weren't going to vote, or maybe they were going to vote one way or the other, but then they see this issue and it actually motivates them and gets them out to the polls to vote in a certain direction. So we see this wedge issue as critically important in this election. I think a lot of candidates see it as well. More should, in our opinion, because we think it's so critical. But that's kind of where we're coming from here. This could make the difference in this election. We saw it happen in the Johnson race with vaping, and we think it could happen in this race with Bitcoin.
There you have it. Vapors and Bitcoiners deciding the fate of America.
Probably a Venn diagram there where the circles overlap. I don't know.
I'm sure there is. So if you hold Bitcoin, recognize that you not only hold the hardest monetary asset in the world, but you also potentially hold the key to this next election. So this is the perfect segue, Brian, towards our next topic, which is, of course, the horse race of politics. Every week in the lead up to the election, we've talked about the state of the race. It's a really interesting dynamic right now because Donald Trump continues to lead in the Polymarket poll. As we can see here, as of today, he has a 64% chance of winning the election compared to 36% by Kamala Harris. And so this is, I believe, the widest margin to date. And it's not just the betting markets that are trending positively for Donald Trump. We're seeing the national polls starting to trend positively for him as well, including even 538. Can you pull that up, Dylan? So 538, up until really just a week ago, was heavily favoring Kamala Harris. But as of just a couple days ago, it put Trump as being the likely odds-on favorite to win this race. In addition to that, we also have Nate Silver, who had for a long time projected that Kamala Harris would win. He too has started to change his tune. His model now shows a Trump win to be more likely. And 21 states that were more or less in the middle toss-ups have now shifted to Donald Trump in just the last month alone. So I personally am watching all this unfold, and a part of me wants to get excited and be bullish on Trump's prospects here. Another part of me sits back and realizes we have 2 weeks till Election Day. That's a long time. We haven't really seen a real October surprise come from the Kamala Harris camp yet. What do you think is going to happen in the next couple of weeks and ultimately on Election Day?
Well, the trends are definitely heading in Trump's direction, which is bad news for the Harris campaign. And Trump does close well. 16, he was pounding the pavement. He was doing multiple rallies every single day, never took a break. He's not taking a break now. In 2020, he even closed the gap quite substantially. He was down 10 points, I think, at the beginning of October. By Election Day, it was down to 3 or 4 points. So he definitely, kind of ramps up. He, of course, now we're dealing with like election month instead of election day because there's so much early voting. So there's a lot of ballots cast, but the numbers coming in are surpassing Republican turnout dramatically compared to past elections. Some other trends, I've seen a couple of fairly accurate national polling firms. Atlas is one and TIPP is another one. And late in the race, they had Biden, I think, up in the 4-point range. That ended up being fairly accurate. This time around, they now have Trump leading in the national popular vote. That's, obviously the Electoral College decides the election, so it's not critically important. But here's my point, is that a Democrat can win the popular vote most of the time because they have very populous states like California where they can run up the score. In 2020, I think there was 2 Democrats running against each other for the Senate seat and no Republican in the made the finals. So from the jungle primary. So they had outsized Democrat voting. The Democrat was probably going to win the popular vote just from a big, bright blue state having increased turnout. And if you look at the number one indicator of how somebody's going to vote these days, it's generally that rural versus urban divide. Obviously, urban has more population than rural. And so it's easier for a Democrat to win the national popular vote, but they could still lose the general because of the Electoral College. If the Republican is winning the national popular vote, it means they're even more likely to win the Electoral College. There's a lot more scenarios where a Republican wins the Electoral College and loses the popular vote than there are the reverse, where a Democrat loses the popular vote but wins the Electoral College. I think that's generally a bullish development. If you look at the Real Clear Politics map, I think, Dylan, you had it up a second ago, the no toss-up map from Real Clear Politics. So this is if you just assume everything within the margin of error, you kind of take out the margin of error, and you just assume that in a poll where Trump is leading by 1%, even though the margin of error might be 3%, you just assume that he's actually winning by 1%. If you take that average of polls, because that's how they do it, they average up all the polls to try to get a more reliable sample. They now are projecting a map where Trump wins 31 states, including 7 out of 7 swing states: Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, all these states, Nevada, all these states that people look at as swing states. Trump is now leading in the average of the polls. That is very, very bullish for him. That means he is in the driver's seat. It means the path 270 electoral votes for Harris is getting narrower, not wider, and Trump is potentially expanding the map. If you look at a state, for example, like Minnesota, pretty blue state, Harris is only up by like 4 points. A lot of the polls in the last election were off by 5+ points. You might even see another state coming into his corner, at which point you're at like 322, 323 electoral votes. That's over 50 more electoral votes than he needs to win. I think we may have a winner on election night because he only needs 270. If you're taking away, let's take away Minnesota. Let's pretend that that's not in play. He could win, I think, like 2 out of the 5 major swing states or 3 that night, and you could have a winner. If you're looking at, let's say, 42 electoral votes, well, Pennsylvania's got 19, Arizona's got 11, that's 30. Nevada's got 9, that you're talking 39. So look at those 3 states, or sub in Michigan there. You could have a few states not complete their counting that night, but Trump still eclipsing the 270 to win. If he takes a state like Georgia, fairly early, fairly substantially, he now has the governor on board. They've made up. They were out of love. Now they're back in love. He's got a very good turnout operation, Governor Kemp. So if you have a situation like that where Trump is declared the projected winner of a couple of those swing states, 2 or 3 of them, he could actually eclipse the 270 and not even need 3 other swing states. And so if they haven't finished counting their ballots, it may not even matter at that point. We might actually have a winner on election night. That is my hope for the country, because I don't want another drawn out process that is contested and divisive. I would like to see a clear winner. And so that's what my hope is that we're in store for in the 2024 election. November 5th is coming up very fast, maybe not fast enough. The anticipation is building. Anyway, that's my crystal ball for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, very interesting. As you mentioned, Brian, Trump closes really well. And one of the most magical moments of this campaign happened just last Sunday when Donald Trump went to McDonald's. I think every now and then during a presidential campaign, you'll have a single moment that will distill the dynamics of the race. And I think Trump at McDonald's frying French fries and handing out hamburgers to people in the drive-thru was that exact moment. Let's watch a couple videos of this.
Tight. You got the salt on her. Never touches a human hand.
Very good.
It's full. A lot of fun here, everybody.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Look at all the pictures of it. Hello, everybody.
You can take this, right?
But this is compliments of Trump, okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. President,
Yes.
please don't let the United States become Brazil by native.
We'll keep it
Please,
good.
please,
We're going to make it better than ever, okay?
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Compliments of Trump.
Yes,
Okay.
so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you over there.
Oh my God.
Have a great
There you go. Trump as a McDonald's manager, he's making McDonald's great again. I
He's
think
loving it.
he's loving it. Absolutely loving it. And honestly, so are a lot of the voters. One who's not loving it, though, are Democrats. Liberals are freaking out over his McDonald's campaign appearance. They're saying this was clearly staged. And my response is, no, duh. What campaign event isn't completely staged?
Wait a minute. You're saying a billionaire, former, possibly future president wasn't actually applying for a job at McDonald's? I am shocked. Shocked, I say. Oh my gosh. Of course. And then the guy was almost assassinated twice in like the last 2 months. You think the Secret Service is not going to like take a look at the people that he's going to be interacting with? Of course, there's a little bit of prep work that goes in. The hyperventilating to me has just made it even better because it's so inauthentic. Like, it would be better for the Democrats to be to kind of laugh and say, all right, he puts on a good show, but we care about the workers and we want to, I don't know, raise the minimum wage or whatever, but just kind of like turn it back to an issue and move on. Instead, they've attacked the McDonald's There was a story about how they had like a faulty health inspection or something. They've attacked him for staging it. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris can't substantiate her well-trodden talking point that she actually worked at McDonald's. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't, but they haven't proven it. Trump seized on it and said, well, I'm actually going to work at McDonald's. And everybody knows he loves McDonald's. He eats it a lot. He loves McDonald's, KFC, huge fast food guy. I remember a hilarious story of him leaving a speech and something was wrong with his plane. And so he got a ride home from a wealthy donor on their plane, and he ordered KFC to the plane, and he was eating his fried chicken, and he said, who needs a private chef when you can have food this good? See, dude really loves his McDonald's. I have friends who were staffing him on the 2016 campaign and would have to go out and get his McDonald's order. He loves McFish, burger, milkshakes, and they would bring it to him after his rallies. He would re-energize with McDonald's. So, I mean, you can call it what you want to call it. It's not inauthentic. His enthusiasm for McDonald's is real. And so this was a hilarious sort of respite from the very serious issues in this campaign. And if you can't smile and have a little good humor about it, what are you even doing? I think the hyperventilating reactions actually just go more in Trump's favor.
Agreed. I think it's a masterclass in how to troll your political opponent. And my other question is, where's the joy? I think the Kamala campaign is supposed to be the campaign of joy. From what I've seen in the past couple of weeks, it's been one of the most joyless campaigns I've ever witnessed. And if you can't see Donald Trump making French fries and running the drive-through booth at a McDonald's and at least smile, you got to chill out. Something's wrong with you.
TDS is real.
TDS is so real, and it's robbing people of their happiness. And if you can't see these memes that have come out of this event, then something's wrong with you too. Let's check out a couple of those. This is one of my favorites. The Donald completely owning McDonald's. And I mean, as you said, Brian, he's loved it for years. It's completely authentic. And that's what's so charming about the man. There's an undeniable charm. He's a billionaire. He's lived as one of the richest men in America for almost his whole life, yet he loves the food of the people, McDonald's. Let's check out a couple other memes. These are just images from his campaign over the last few months, and honestly, they're iconic. Let's go to that first one of him waving through the drive-through window. I mean, that's the image that launched a million memes. The staying power of this image alone, I think, will be with us for many years to come. Let's check out this one. This looks like the most AI-generated image I've ever seen, but it's 100% real. Just the lighting, the situation, everything. But it's an hilarious image. Donald Trump making French fries. And then, of course, we have sort of a montage of all the iconic moments from the Trump candidacy, from his mugshot to his court painting, to him after being almost assassinated, to his RFK endorsement, to Elon jumping up for joy, and of course, back to McDonald's and French fries. This is something that if you are a contrived, Hollywood-produced, micromanaged campaign like Kamala Harris, you cannot compete with. These are perfectly, just many of them are organic moments. Truly, some of them are, there's a little bit of staging involved with some of those, but I mean, the man was made for the TV screen. He was made for the camera, and you can't compete with that kind of earned media. I think memes are the best earned media there is because they replicate like a internet virus, and before you know it, a single image can be seen by tens of millions of Americans across the country, whereas a single campaign ad might only be seen by a few 100,000. So truly amazing what's coming out of this campaign in the late stages.
Yeah, I mean, bootstrapping it. In 16, he was outspent, 5-1 or something, but his earned media value was in the billions. And look, he's a producer first. He had the #1 rated show in The Apprentice for, 10 years, something like that. However many years. Long time, maybe one of the longest runs ever as the #1 rated show. He is a producer at heart. I've staffed him for interviews. He always is very meticulous in how he looks, where he's positioned, what the lighting is. I mean, he is truly a producer at heart, and a billionaire serving fries at McDonald's is hilarious. It harkens back to the county fair exercise that all these candidates do, like in Iowa, where they go and they eat fried butter and pretend to like it and put on a flannel shirt, even though they've spent their careers in boardrooms. He showed up in his helicopter and gave little kids helicopter rides. There was no hiding the fact that he's rich. He didn't pretend not to be. He showed up to McDonald's to work in his cufflinks and red tie and custom suit. You can't say he's inauthentic. You can criticize him for some things. That's not one of them. And this was a hilarious, good, clean, wholesome, fun moment in a campaign that is otherwise very serious. So I think people loved it.
Yeah. And I like to go a little bit deeper on it, honestly, because this wasn't the only viral food moment of the presidential campaign. If we compare and contrast Donald Trump at McDonald's and Kamala Harris at an artisanal spice store, I think you see where the two constituencies of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party lie today. Because McDonald's truly is the food of the masses. It's something that I think a lot of cultural elites look at with their noses turned up and they remind themselves, I haven't been to McDonald's in I don't know how many years because they're above it, supposedly. And then you have what's becoming more and more the constituency of the Democratic Party, which is very affluent, mostly white elites. And you saw a very viral moment back in September when Kamala Harris visited this spice store in Pittsburgh. Can you roll that clip for us?
What is that about? I think you understand. I'm pretty sure you know.
Oh, it's gonna be good. We're gonna be good. We're gonna be fine. We're gonna be fine. We are all in this together. We're gonna be fine.
We are.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
All right, that gives you a little taste of it. So I don't want to diminish what that lady's feeling because she's clearly very upset about the state of our country, unnecessarily so, because if you want to talk about TDS, that's a very clear case of TDS. This election should never bring you to tears, right? But staying right next to her, you have what clearly is a Georgetown grad. Later in the movie, she says that she's a legal professional in the city of Pittsburgh who went to Georgetown. And this is an artisanal spice store in Pittsburgh, and the company is called Penzies. And most interestingly, this spice store, they have a section on their website that says about Republicans, where they talk about how much they dislike Republicans and where the Republican Party is going wrong. Absolutely absurd. You can see, I'll read that first sentence in the second paragraph. Watching the slow decline of the Republican Party over the last half century and the steep decline / bottom falling out over the last decade, it can be easy to see the nonsense that has overtaken the party. This is absurd that you have a private business that is openly alienating 50% of its potential customers. Just strange stuff. And that's the exact store that Kamala Harris was visiting that day. So, Brian, am I reading too much into this, or do you think that the McDonald's moment and the artisanal spice store really does reflect where the constituencies of the two parties lie today?
No, I mean, you make a point. And one thing that I've noticed that seems to go more, it's not, totally this way, but it generally goes more in one direction than the other, where those on the left look at not just their hatred of Donald Trump, but they look down on his voters. We saw it with Barack Obama saying they're clinging to their guns and religion. He was much maligned, rightfully so, for that comment. We saw Hillary Clinton call them a basket of deplorables. These are people to whom Donald Trump is speaking. His economic message resonates. He wants to build an America. He wants to tariff foreign products. He wants to incentivize more companies to create jobs here. That goes against some Republican free trade orthodoxy over the last several decades. He really is putting together a new coalition, including working class voters, including minority voters, blacks and Hispanics who are tired of the woke stuff. Maybe they like religion. Maybe they go to church. Maybe they believe in Jesus. Maybe they, there are other things other than the color of their skin that they care about, and some of the pandering the Democratic Party has done. But rather than looking inward, they look outward and down on people who are thinking differently than themselves. And so they view sort of the new Republican voter as victims of a propaganda machine when they're looking back at those same leftist voters and thinking the same thing, that you've been propagandized, you've had your mind warped by, what Elon would call the woke mind virus. But I don't see the same vitriol coming back. I don't see the same kind of, just victim projection kind of phenomenon. So hopefully that the people in that spice store wake up and realize that the economy would probably be better. Their business would do better if Trump were elected. I tend to think that that's true, and they can get out of this propagandized mind fog that they seem to be in. I won't be patronizing that store because they've basically told me that they don't want independent thinkers to shop there. So I won't. Not that I'm into artisanal spices anyway, but I may go to McDonald's for lunch because that looked pretty good.
Yeah, grab a milkshake, Big Mac. That's my kind of lunch. Well, good stuff. Well, Brian, we're coming up on time here, but we always end with our grab bag section. Rumor has it you're a fan of baseball and pinstripes. Tell us more about the Yankees.
Sir. The New York Yankees heading back to the World Series, chasing number 28, facing off against the storied Los Angeles Dodgers, of course, formerly the Brooklyn Dodgers, formerly the Trolley Dodgers, I think was the origin of their team name. This is, I think, no two teams have ever faced off as much as the Yankees and Dodgers in the World Series, two of the most successful franchises in history. And it's special to me because my dad grew up a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, but was always entertained by the Yankees. Used to go see Mickey Mantle play, Sandy Koufax, Duke Snider, all the greats. And he actually was at 1956 World Series when Don Larson threw the only perfect game in World Series history. And Yogi Berra was the catcher for the Yankees, of course, a Hall of Famer. His number's retired in Monument Park at Yankee Stadium. He leapt up into Don Larson's arms and they celebrated the only perfect game in World Series history. So I'm very excited to see what happens this year with Aaron Judge and Juan Soto and Giancarlo Stanton facing off against Shohei Ohtani, the new superstar of Major League Baseball, and the other great players on the Dodgers. I'll be rooting for the Yankees. I don't know if my dad's going to go for the Yankees or Dodgers, having been a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, but kind of came over to the Yankees when the Dodgers moved to LA. In any event, it's going to be really fun to watch the series with him. So I wanted to tee it up with a really cool memory and not memory, but video, iconic World Series video from 1956. This is the end of Don Larson's perfect game, the only perfect game in World Series history. Dylan, we can roll that.
Larson is ready, gets the sign. 2 strikes, ball 1. Here comes the pitch. Strike 3. A no-hitter, a perfect game for Don Larson. Yogi Berra runs out there. He leaps on Larson, and he's swarmed by his teammates. Listen to this crowd roar. The first World Series no-hitter, a perfect performance by Don Larson.
Pretty cool. Back when Yogi Berra was a World War II veteran, a real war hero. Went on to win World Series with the Yankees, of course, then was a manager, now a Hall of Famer. I actually got my dad a signed picture by Don Larson of that moment of Yogi Berra jumping up into his arms. So really cool moment back when Americans were pro-America and excellence was really celebrated. Not that it isn't today, but could be a little more. Maybe there are some lessons. Not everything was perfect back then. Of course, there were some very serious issues, but one of kind of the golden moments of that era, and certainly in the history of baseball. So hopefully we'll have moments like that in this year's World Series. I will be watching. Let's go Yankees. All rise for the Judge. All the other slogans. Let's do it. Let's bring home number 28, New York. There we go. That was how I was feeling on Sunday morning after seeing the Yankees win the pennant. I believe it was their 41st pennant, trying for their 28th World Series. So here we go. Friday night, it kicks off. I will be tuning in. Happy moment to close the pod.
Yeah, good stuff. I don't think the Yankees have been this good since George Costanza was in the management team, which Brenner.
They're bringing back the cotton turtlenecks. They finally listened to George Costanza, who had recommended they have cotton uniforms. Of course, that went poorly in the episode because they washed the uniforms and they shrunk. And then Don Mattingly split his pants. Hopefully they won't have the same issue with the cotton turtlenecks, but it should be a really fun series.
Well, good stuff. Well, that about closes us out for today. We touched on so many different topics: central bankers, Bitcoin voting, Pennsylvania swing voters, artisanal spice stores, McDonald's, Donald Trump, French fries, and of course, the New York Yankees. Anything else we should touch on before we close?
Like and subscribe. Find us on social media at Morgenstern NJ, at Sam Lyman 33. Watch that World Series. Get out and vote. And we will see what happens in this election and in this World Series. And we'll see you next time on the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod.